Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for the IELTS reading question type matching features lesson today. In this lesson, we're going to look at the matching features question type, and I'll teach its strategy to tackle this question type, and I'll walk you through a full example with step-by-step instructions. Now, a lot of students don't do very well with the matching features question type, and a lot of candidates are also nervous when it comes to this question type. And that's because it requires students to look through different details in the readings. And students can sometimes be a bit thrown off by all the information that they need to look through. But don't worry, if you follow our step-by-step instructions and take our tips and tricks into consideration, you'll do just fine. Now, before we get started, I'd like to show you a brief overview of what we'll be looking at today. So we're going to look at an example of questions and a passage of an IELTS academic reading exam. First, we're going to read the questions. Then we're going to pull out keywords. Then we're going to focus on the answer options. And I'll explain the do's and don'ts and how to best approach steps 1 through 3. And then once we're done with the preparation work, we're going to scan the passage, and then we're going to skim the paragraphs. It's very important to note the difference between scanning and skimming. I'll talk about it a bit later when we're looking at our specific example, but just keep in mind that scanning is sort of like reading with a headlight. So you are looking for specific keywords. Skimming, on the other hand, is reading quickly in order to understand information. And we're going to tackle both steps 4 and 5 in order to maximize time and efficiency. Okay, let's get started. Basically, this question type will test your ability to match a numbered list of factual statements or opinions to a group of features. And these features are taken from the text. So if we look here, on the right-hand side, we see our text. And on the left-hand side here, we see our questions 18 through 21. Most often, you'll see your potential options presented in a box, just like this here. List of people. These options are usually someone's name, which we see in our specific example here. And these names have been mentioned in the passage. Going along with the theme of academic readings with academic IELTS, these names will usually be of experts or researchers and also scientists. Okay, so these questions usually contain theories or comments about people. They might ask you for specific dates, specific places, and like I said earlier, even opinions. Now, another thing to also keep in mind is that the names of researchers or scientists or what have you may appear as only last names. Now, in our example here, we see both the first name and the last name. So for example, we see Edmund Halley. In some exercises, however, you may only see the last name. So in that case, it would only be Halley. And so when you look in your text, you will probably see the first name as well, but just be aware that the last name can also be used. Also, the information is not always listed in order. So for example, Edmund Halley may or may not be the first name that you come across in your text. So in that case, this question type calls for both the skimming and the scanning techniques, which we'll talk about a bit later. Let's get started. First, on the left-hand side, you'll see step 1. Read the questions and pull out keywords. This is the best way to approach the match features section on the IELTS exam because you want to get a general idea of each piece of information while underlining any keywords as necessary. This will help you read for a purpose instead of reading blindly. For example, if we look at 18, 19, 20, and 21, these are our questions. Before we even start reading the text, we'll want to read all of these questions and underline quickly any keywords that stick out to you as pertinent information. And later, when we read the text, we'll use these keywords to guide us in finding the answer. So let's start with number 18, and let's just practice reading and underlining any keywords. So number 18, he calculated the distance of the sun from the earth based on observations of Venus with a fair degree of accuracy. Keywords that stick out would be distance, sun, earth, Venus, and also accuracy. Note how we just underlined accuracy. We did not underline fair degree of, because that's a supporting detail for the level of accuracy. And we don't want to bother ourselves with a ton of detail or a ton of information when reading, because you have a time limit for the reading sections and you want to maximize your efficiency. So accuracy is all that's needed in this case. Okay, number 19. He understood that the distance of the sun from the earth could be worked out by comparing observations of a transit. Again, distance is important. Sun and earth are important because they are specific names. And comparing transit, these are also two important words that differentiate number 19 from the rest of the questions, because this specific person compared the observations of transit. This is important. Number 20. He realized that the time taken by a planet to go around the sun depends on its distance from the sun. And so in this case, we'll be looking out for a planet. It doesn't have a specific name here, so it could be a general planet. In any case, it's specific information that is important. The sun, again, is specific and therefore important. And again, distance from the sun. These are things that we'll want to read for and scan for in the text. And lastly, he witnessed a Venus transit but was unable to make any calculations. Venus is a specific word. Transit is also a key word here, and calculations. So these are keywords that you've just underlined from reading the questions from the first time. Going back to step 1, it says for optional practice, you can start thinking of different synonyms and ways that you could say the information in a different way. Now this is optional, but it is excellent practice, because even though we have these keywords in our questions, the IELTS academic reading usually contains tricks that are included to confuse the reader or test the reader's vocabulary. So for example, if we look here at number 19, we'll see a phrasal verb. Now phrasal verbs are very, very important in English, and even more so important during the IELTS exam. If we see, let's read this again. He understood that the distance of the sun from the earth could be worked out by comparing observations of a transit. Now it's very common in the IELTS exam to use phrasal verbs in the questions and then use a synonym that isn't a phrasal verb in the reading, or vice versa. So it's always a good idea to think of synonyms, especially for phrasal verbs. You'll see here also number 20, depends on, is another phrasal verb that is used. And so although it's an optional step, I would highly suggest thinking of synonyms for the keywords and also in general for the questions that you see. So for this specific example, I'll show you the synonyms and I'll give you a little bit of a description on which synonyms were chosen. If I clear our screen, just to give us a blank slate, I'll go here and show keywords. Now these keywords are what we have already underlined. But here, synonyms, you'll see the words that we've chosen. So for example, instead of calculated, it says computed. And instead of observations, we see inspection. Accuracy, we see quite the amount of precision. So again, these are just different ways to say keywords and other words in the questions themselves. Number 19, we see that everything is the same until we get to calculated. So worked out, which is what we talked about before as a phrasal verb, Another great way to say worked out would be calculated. And comparing observations of a transit could be monitoring of a transit. Number 20, this synonym here is contingent on, is another excellent way to say depends on, another phrasal verb. And then number 21, we see was not able to for unable to, and formulate for make, computations for calculations. Again, this is an optional step, but I would highly recommend it during your practice for the exam. Okay, now let's go back here and let's go to step 2. Now, step 2, we want to focus on the answer options. So in this case, our answer options are in this lovely table above our questions. And you want to ask yourself 2 questions. The first question is, how many answer options are available? In this case, we see 4 answer options, A, B, C, and D. And then we want to ask ourselves, do the directions tell you that they can be used more than once? Because sometimes the directions will say that perhaps the options can be used more than once, and you know that perhaps A could be used twice, or B, and so on and so on. In this case, however, it says match each description with the correct people, write the correct number or letter, in this case, A through D, in boxes questions 18 through 21 on your answer sheet. Since there are 4 potential options and nothing is listed in the instructions about using an answer more than once, we can rest assured that each person will be used only once, okay? And we've broken down step 1 and step 2 right now during our step-by-step example, but the more you practice and the more you become an expert at IELTS reading, this step can be done at the same time that you're focusing on reading the questions. And again, the more you practice, the more you'll be able to combine these 2 steps and really maximize your time. Okay, now we're at step 3, scan the passage. Now earlier I mentioned the difference between scanning for information and skimming for information, and this is very important, especially for the match features question type. Basically, what we're going to do is scan the text for these 4 people. And you want to think of scanning as a headlight. And what I mean by headlight is that you're scanning the text for just those names. So you're not scanning the text to understand the information, but you're just trying to locate those names. So for example, if we look here in our text and we're looking for just those names, we see Edmund Halley right away here, Halley again, and Halley again in section C. Then we see Kepler. So just from looking at this, we see that Halley is mentioned in section B and section C. This is a good clue because it means that Halley is mentioned more than once and in more than one section. So that question may be a bit more difficult to answer since we'll have to read different types of information for Halley. I'll clear our screen and we can move down and scroll down. Again, we see Kepler here. Again, Halley also in section D, which means we'll also have to read section D for Halley. And we see also Le Gentil here. And notice that I'm only doing last names just because I have those fresh in my memory. And remember, last names are also just as good as first names, and they will still grab your attention when you need to skim for information. I'll clear our screen again so we can scroll down. We have our last 3 sections here, sections E, F, and G. And let's also scan for the other names. We have Enck as well here. And you see, these are the names that we looked at. So Halley appears more than once, always keep that in mind. Kepler, Le Gentil, and Enck. Now, section E does not contain any names, nor does G. So more than likely we can eliminate those from our skimming list. We can also eliminate section A from our skimming list because we do not have any names included in section A. Now that we have scanned, we can clear our drawings here and move on to the next step, which will be skimming the paragraphs and answering the questions. Okay, now if we go down here again to questions 18 through 21, we'll do this together. Okay, now remember, as we saw in the previous step, we are most likely not going to need this information nor section A, so we can already skip that. I will go ahead and just remind us of where Hallie was located, because Hallie was located quite often in the text, as we saw from our scanning techniques. So let's save Hallie for last, because we'll have to read a bit to understand which option is the best for Hallie. But just so we can see the names again, we have Hallie twice, we have Kepler here. Okay, let's scan around for Kepler, because we see Kepler is mentioned only once. So this sentence, Johann Kepler in the early 17th century had shown that the distances of the planets from the sun governed their orbital speeds, which were easily measurable. Now, this is only one sentence, and I've just skimmed and understood the meaning of this sentence to save on time. And I have underlined some key words that we are already aware of based on our first and second steps. So just from this sentence, I'd like to see if this is similar to any of these options here. I'm looking at distances, planet, and sun. And already I see number 20, which has the keywords planet, sun, and distance. Now I want to see if these two sentences are similar. So again, I want to read, Johann Kepler in the early 17th century had shown that the distances of the planets from the sun governed their orbital speeds, which were easily measurable. And number 20, he realized that the time taken by a planet to go round the sun depends on its distance from the sun. In my view, those are very similar, and I would already say that number 20 is B, Johann Kepler. And so provisionally, I'll write B here, just so we have an idea, and I will cross off B from my list of people. Okay, let's move on. I'll clear our screen, and let's go down to section D, and E, and F, because if we remember, G will not be necessary since we did not have any names in paragraph G. So again, just to remind us, let's go ahead and underline Hallie here, Le Gentil is here, and Enk is in section F. Okay, let's go to Le Gentil, since again, we're saving Hallie for last. The person who deserves most sympathy is the French astronomer Julien Le Gentil. He was thwarted by the fact that the British were besieging his observation site at Pondicherry in India. Fleeing on a French warship crossing the Indian Ocean, Le Gentil saw a wonderful transit, but the ship's pitching and rolling ruled out any attempt at making accurate observations. Already, I remember my keywords from step 1 and 2, accurate and observations. So we see here, he saw a wonderful transit, but the ship's pitching and ruling out any attempt at making accurate observations. Let's look back here. Now we've already done 20, so we can cross that out. We see 21. He witnessed a Venus transit, but was unable to make any calculations. Now the only thing we'll want to confirm is that we are talking about Venus. So if we go and scroll up a bit, we do see that the sentence before paragraph D contains information about Venus. And so in that case, the transit that we're talking about in section D is a Venus transit. Therefore, the answer to number 21 is Le Gentil, which would be C. So far, we have number 21 as C, number 20 as B, so we can successfully eliminate B and C. And now we're left with two options, Edmund Halley and Johann Franz Encke. I'll clear our screen again, and we can head down to Encke, which was in paragraph F. Let's go ahead and look here. He finally determined a value for the AU based on all these parallax measurements. And here we see some numbers. Reasonably accurate for the time, again, another keyword, that is quite close to today's value, again, numbers, determined by radar. We'll want to also look at the sentence before Johann Franz Encke's name. It states, but astronomers labored hard to analyze the results of these expeditions to observe Venus transits. And then it later states, he finally determined a value for the AU based on these parallax measurements. This information contains the keywords Venus, which we had from before, and accurate. Therefore, it's the best option for the statement. He calculated the distance of the sun from the Earth based on observations of Venus with a fair degree of accuracy. So we can state that number 18 would be D. Now, through using process of elimination, we could say that 19 is clearly A, Edmund Halley. However, let's just look at the reasoning behind it so that we can have 100% confidence in our answers. Now, if we go back up to where Halley was mentioned, remember that Halley was mentioned quite a bit. Now, if we look again at number 19, we see the keywords distance, sun, and earth. And even though Halley is mentioned quite often in the text, if we search for those three words, we should find the answer that we're looking for. So by scanning for those words, we should find ourselves in paragraph B because we see distance, earth, and sun. So we should be starting at paragraph B. If we see here, it says Halley observed a transit. He realized that the passage of the planet across the sun's disk would appear to differ. We'll also see here, calculating this angle would allow astronomers to measure what was then the ultimate goal, the distance of the Earth from the sun. If we read here again, number 19, he understood that the distance of the sun from the Earth could be worked out by comparing observations of a transit. These are very similar. Again, we also have process of elimination, so we can successfully put A for number 19. Now, just to review, we had number 18 as D, Johann Franz Encke, 19 as A, 20 as B, Johann Kepler, and 21 as C, Guillaume Le Gentil. Let's go ahead and check our answers. And we see that we were correct. D, A, B, and C. And if you look here, we see our keywords underlined with explanations as well. So notice how our keywords, the skimming, and the scanning techniques all helped us successfully answer these questions. Okay, now just to review everything we looked at in this matching features lesson, I'd like to go over some do's and don'ts for the exam. First off, you always want to read the questions first and circle or underline any keywords just like we did in step 1. Remember, read the questions first so you're not reading blindly during the exam. Second, make sure you scan the passage looking for the information provided in the questions. Always think of scanning like a headlight, like I explained earlier. You're looking for specific information. Then after that, you want to skim as necessary in the areas surrounding the keywords in the passage. And then this is also very important, write only letters in your answer sheet, okay? Do not write any words in your answer booklet for this section. So instead of writing, for example, Halley, we would write the letter A. Okay, now for the don'ts. Again, do not read the passage first. You do not want to read blindly. Do not read for general information. Remember, the IELTS exam is not easy reading. It's not fun reading. You want to take advantage of the time you're given to read for specific details using the scanning and the skimming techniques. Also, don't repeat any letters if not instructed to do so in the directions. Remember, for our specific example, each option was used once, but make sure to read the directions. And of course, like I said before, do not write any words in your answer booklet for this section or for the IELTS reading in general, unless instructed to do so. Okay, thanks again for joining me for this lesson. Remember, if you'd like to practice more of your IELTS reading techniques, you can visit us at www.bestmytest.com/IELTS. Again, that's www.bestmytest.com/IELTS. Thanks again. Hope to see you for the next lesson.